Okay, this is BTEC Sport Unit 1, the second revision podcast. We've already dealt with skill-related components, physical-related components, methods and principles in the first one. So this one is to pick up the other stuff. So we're going to start with really a reference back to body composition, which is a physical-related component of fitness, and looking at the three tests. So we did mention in the first one there was three tests. We've got BMI, which is height versus weight, which we said wasn't very good because it doesn't consider your build. Then we've got the Jackson-Pollock nomogram method, where you need to test in men and women in three different areas using skin fold calipers. That's the piece of equipment. On a woman, you test on the tricep, the suprailiac and the thigh. And on the man, you test on the chest, the abdomen and the thigh. You add them scores together, you need their age, and you do a line across the nomogram from their age to the three numbers you added up, and where it crosses the man or woman line is the percentage body fat. That's the Jackson-Pollock nomogram method. The third method is BIA, bioelectrical impedance analysis, and that is where you send a current through the body. When the current hits fat, or something else, basically it will slow the current down, therefore being able to measure body fat. Remember that you put the electrodes on the ankle and the foot and the wrist and the hand, normally on the right hand side of the body, and obviously that's the best test for body composition and test the amount of body fat someone has. So that are the three tests for body composition. We've also got the Borg Scale that we need to know about. So the Borg Scale is a scale that measures how difficult an activity is. So first of all, you go to the Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale, RPE, and that is from 6 to 20, and that rates how hard you think the activity is on that scale. That measures exercise intensity. Then whatever number you have, you times it by 10 to get the approximate heart rate for the activity. So, for example, if we rated football as 15 from somewhere between 6 and 20, but we rated it as 15, we are saying the approximate heart rate for a footballer would be 150 beats a minute, because 15 times 10 is 150. Remember, you must put the value on the end, beats per minute, and that is the Borg scale. We've also got to look at our training thresholds. So training thresholds tells you how hard you are working in relation to your heart rate. So to work out, first of all, you have to work out your maximum heart rate in beats per minute. So you get the number 220 and you take away the age to get the maximum heart rate. So if you were 30, you would take 220 minus 30. Your maximum heart rate would be 190 beats per minute. Then you need to work out your target training zone. Your target training zone is between 60 and 85% of your maximum heart rate. So whatever number you got from 220 minus your age, you times it by 0.6 to get 60%, and you times it by 0.85 to get 85%. Anywhere between 60 and 85% of max heart rate is called your target training zone, and if you are in there, you will improve your cardiovascular fitness or aerobic endurance, whichever one you want to call it. 60% is the point where your body starts to use oxygen, demand oxygen, the point where you go aerobic. Therefore, this is called your aerobic threshold. 60 to 85 is your target training zone. Then if you go above 85%, you would go anaerobic, which means you are crossing your anaerobic threshold. You wouldn't be able to stay there for long because basically you'd get lactic acid in your muscles, you'd get cramp and you'd stop. So your target training zone is between 60 and 85% of your maximum heart rate. And to work out your maximum heart rate, 220 minus your age, and make sure you give those beats per minute again. We also have to remind you about optimum performance. So optimum performance is ensuring that an athlete is at their physical and mental peak to perform at their very best level. But your optimum performance must consider your sport and your position played. So to get optimum performance, you have to consider a number of things. What is the best training methods to help you get there? So if you are a sprinter, you would need to make sure you did interval training or hollow sprints or acceleration sprints, maybe some weight training, maybe some circuit training. But you'd say whatever sport you do, you'd have to consider the methods. You definitely have to consider principles. So are you going to progressively overload till you reach your peak at the right time to be optimum performance? Obviously, you wouldn't want to be injured because reversibility occur, well, then you couldn't possibly be at optimum performance. You would probably consider your diet. If your diet was wrong, you couldn't reach optimum performance. Or even if you were physically fit, if you had the wrong food prior to performance, it might diminish how successful you were at that performance. You would definitely consider individual needs from the principles because they're really important. If I've had injuries, if I'm on medication, if my age, my gender, anything to do with me as an athlete, I would have to consider that to get me optimum performance. The position would be key. So optimum performance for a goalkeeper would be very different than optimum performance for a centre midfielder because they've got different requirements of their sport and different individual needs. And obviously your whole training up to that point would work towards optimum performance. So a number of things that lead to optimum performance to ensure the athlete is at their physical and mental peak to perform at their very best. We also mentioned another topic was safety in training. So we looked at how to keep people safe when they're training or playing sports. So we should be remembering things like make sure you have warmed up correctly before you start. Make sure you wear the correct personal protective equipment. Remember, that is personal protective equipment is things that is physically you are wearing. That's shin pads, that is mouth guard, that is head guards, that might be gloves in particular sports, cricket pads. It could be a helmet in cricket or hockey. Anything that you are wearing on your body that protects you to keep you safe is a personal piece of personal protective equipment. We've also got sport-specific equipment. So this is not worn by the actual player, but it's provided by the sport to make sure you are safe. So that is things like rugby post protectors to make sure if you were diving for the try line, you wouldn't get injured. It's things like the cage when you're throwing a discus. So if you threw the discus wrong, it wouldn't go off in the wrong direction. It's things like the ring in boxing to make sure that fighters weren't punched and then fell out the ring and got more damage. So these are sport-specific safety equipment relevant to that particular sport, but not worn by the actual athlete. We've got playing to the rules. Rules in games are specifically designed to keep you safe. So the high tackle in rugby, making sure the stick isn't too high in hockey, the two-footed tackle or the tackle from behind in football. Many different sports have got rules that are designed to keep players safe. If I was going to use an example in the exam, I would use the high tackle in rugby because it's designed to protect people's heads and necks from being jolted back and resulting in serious injury. Another method of keeping you safe is training correctly for the event, making sure you have trained up to the event and correctly for the event. So again, we don't want this example of someone who's been motivated by seeing the marathon on the TV, goes to run, tries to run far too far a distance and ends up injured or ill because they've not trained correctly for that event. You need to make sure your body is ready for the competition or the training, so you must train correctly up to the event, as is playing at the right skill level. So you must make sure that you play at a level that is relevant for you as an athlete and as a skill level. You wouldn't put an amateur boxer in with someone who's had 20 professional fights because it would be likely that they'd probably get injured or hurt in that particular situation. Again, playing at the right skill level for you and the right level is important to keep you safe from injury. So lots of possibilities there to look at injury prevention. Last couple of areas we need to look at. We've looked in the first podcast about all the tests for components of fitness. And again, there's a couple of things that you should do before conducting those tests. So if I just very quickly run through the tests again, as a reminder, in skill-related components, the test for balance is the standing stalk. The test for power is the sergeant jump or the standing broad jump. The test for coordination is the alternate hand throw test. The test for agility is the Illinois agility test. And the test for reaction time is the ruler drop test. In physical components, body composition, I've mentioned on this podcast, is BMI, Jackson-Pollock nomogram, or BIA. For flexibility, it is the sit and reach test. For muscular strength, it is the hand grip dynamometer. For muscular endurance, It is the 1 minute sit-up test or 1 minute press-up test. For cardiovascular fitness or aerobic endurance, it is the forestry step test or the multi-stage fitness test, and for speed it is the 30-meter sprint test. For all of those things, there might be questions asked about the equipment that you use for it and how it's set out. It would be important that things are measured correctly, so that if you're doing the Illinois agility test, that the course is the right distance and the right distance between cones. If you're doing the standing broad jump, you need to make sure that the tape measures out the right distance so that we get the right distance measured. If you're doing the 30-meter sprint test, you must make sure that the 30 meters is measured correctly. For all these tests, you must make sure that equipment is correctly used. Some of them would need the correct calibration of equipment. So calibration of equipment is resetting the equipment before you use it. Obviously, if you're doing the hand grip dynamometer or the sit and reach test, you need to make sure that it was in the correct position before you started, recalibrated and set back to 0 before you did the test, to make sure that the tests are fair and valid. And the other way of ensuring fitness test validity are making sure all tests are administered correctly and recorded correctly, to make sure that if you're comparing different people or comparing tests, that you get fair results. Finally, before you do any of these tests, you would make your athletes do an informed consent form. This is where it gives permission and you get some individual needs information of them before you start the training program. That is called an informed consent form. The final thing I just want to mention is VO2 Max. So VO2 Max is the ability of the body to utilise oxygen over a period of time. This basically measures your aerobic endurance. How effectively does your body get oxygen to the working muscles? It's measured in millilitres, stroke kilograms, stroke per minute. And there is a calculation in the exam. Remember, in the exam, there is an online calculator which you can use to show your working. That will cover most of the main topics. Obviously, you'll have to apply your knowledge onto some of the longer questions. If we just talk about the longer questions for a minute, and the longer questions, please make sure you define anything you think is relevant, if you think that's appropriate. Generally, we're going to use the acronym of PEAL. So you're going to make a point. P is point. E is explain that point. So what does it mean? Why is it relevant to that particular sport or athlete? E is the effect. So what actually happens because of the point you're making? Is there an effect on the sport performance? Does it make them better, worse, whatever else? And then L is links. Does it link to any other part of the course that could gain you an extra mark? If it's an 8-mark question, you need to be writing a good paragraph with quite a lot of information in it. You're not going to get 8 marks writing 4 sentences. Be realistic about it. Point, explain, effect, and then link where you need it. It could be you have to have a sporting example, that's fine. Add in a sporting example if you need to. So they're the longer mark questions. The same principle would apply on 4-mark questions as well. If it's a 4-mark question, make sure you give more than one piece of information. Explain your point in detail, maybe link it on, maybe give a sporting example. I hope you're using the podcasts to your benefit. Any more information you need, just see me. And make sure you're revising up to that exam, which for us